This is Nasha Kasha, Ukrainian Almanac, 28 minutes of stories for everyone about Ukrainian life. Nasha Kasha is heard on 19 campus and community radio stations from Newfoundland to British Columbia. I'm your reporter, Stefan Andrusiak, and this is episode 242. It is mid-January 2021, and we are staying pretty close to home. I reported and produced television news programs most of my professional life. I love radio, however, because its sounds can take us anywhere, even in the middle of a pandemic. Be well, my friends. This week's topic is Odessa, Ontario. You're listening to Fin Jam, Winnipeg's pride and joy. This cut is called Odessa Bulgar. It's the final melody on the album Crossing Selkirk Avenue, and it's available from Red House Records. Odessa, Ontario is 16 miles or 26 kilometers west of the city of Kingston. It is in the heart of Loyalist Township, named after the United Empire Loyalists, who were loyal to the King of England and who settled in the area after the American Revolution. Odessa, Ukraine is a port city on the Black Sea, the Pearl of the Black Sea, the fifth largest city in Ukraine. According to Ukraine.com, it is arguably the most important city in the country for trade. It looks like a city located on the Mediterranean, having been heavily influenced by French and Italian architectural styles. The city has a wide variety of people, including Ukrainian, Russian, Moldavian, Greek, Romanian, Bulgarian, Jewish, Turkish, and Vietnamese. So why would the descendants of British Loyalists in faraway Ontario name a town Odessa? The answer to that question is today's story on Nasha Kasha. This episode was originally heard in October of 2017. Odessa, Ontario is home to Ernestown Secondary School, which services about 650 students from Loyalist Township. The highest point in the village is a water tower visible for several kilometers in all directions. The village bills itself as home of the Babcock Mill, which historically was powered by Millhaven Creek. That creek runs through the heart of Odessa. Many communities in the area originally had the word mill and or creek in their names. There is a small fairground. An Ontario Provincial Police Detachment services nearby Highway 401. There is a fire hall and Loyalist County's offices. At these offices is where our story begins.
I am Pam.
Pam, hi.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Come on in. My name's Pamela Bernard. I've been here at Ernestown, previously now Loyalist Township, for over 30 years, originally in the clerk's department, but I'm now in planning and building the last 2 or 3 years, but I am from the area as well. I'm from Wilton, that's just north of Odessa, about 5 miles.
What do you do here?
Well, right now I'm doing planning and building, so you're doing subdivisions, zonings, severances, variances, and I back up for building, the girl in building department for building permits and that. We're quite busy right now. There's quite a bit of development in Loyalist Township right now, being so close to Kingston.
Do you have an engineering background?
No, I took the Association of Municipal Clerks and Treasurers of Ontario when I was in my early 20s, and I've been here ever since.
Where did you grow up?
Wilton. Just north of here, yeah. And I live in Odessa right now.
Was it natural to say Odessa?
Yeah. Yeah, no problem at all. Yeah, just it was always Odessa.
The Loyalists were loyal to the British Crown at the time of the American Revolution and moved up here.
A lot of people were here already and were just trying to exist and feed themselves. I mean, it was forest here back then. And but there was a Loyalist that did come in from New York State and places like that. Also, a lot of Dutch came up as well from New York State.
What is the character of the area? What are you known for? Is it primarily a farming community? Is it a bedroom community to Kingston? Can you just give me a little bit of that?
I would say when I was growing up, there was a lot of farming. There was actually, we have the Wilton Cheese Factory that actually, our milk went there when I was young. But I wouldn't say it's a primary farming anymore, but originally it probably was.
There's a creek running through Odessa, and there was a mill here at one point. Is it?
A lot of mills in the township, actually. The whole area, previously a lot of the names of the villages had mills involved. And when they changed the name here, it was the postmaster who suggested changing it.
And Odessa was once called?
Mill Creek. Yeah, and it changed, they're saying approximately 1856. At the time of the Crimean War. That is what they're thinking. That's the history we have from our Ernestown history book. Like Wilton, which is part of this township, was called Simmons Mills, and Millhaven was called Booth Mills, and Colebrook, which is actually in Stone Mills Township, was called Peters Mills, and Mill Creek, which is now Odessa, they assume was named by Mr. Timmerman, who was the postmaster at the time. And one of the interesting things, which we don't know if it's true or not, but it seems a lot of the ones that were named was when mail was starting to come through. They didn't want a bunch of mill creeks.
What's the best part of living in Odessa?
It's very convenient to everything in town, but it still has the rural feel that I had from growing up on a 100-acre farm in Wilton. You know your neighbors, you know the people at the store. There's still some of that, but the bigger you get, you lose a bit of that. But there is a big development on the other end of Odessa, and eventually there can be 500 houses in there. There's still more subdivisions coming.
When you say we're close to town, you mean Kingston?
Well, yes, and I mean, I go to Napanee a lot. It's a little further to Napanee. One's probably 20 minutes, one's probably 15.
You know, the only Canadian city, I looked it up, that is twinned with Odessa in Ukraine is Vancouver. Maybe you guys can make a pitch to twin Odessa.
Yeah, I don't know that. I won't comment on that.
I dream of Jeannie with a light brown hair, born like a baby.
You're listening to the song Jeannie with the Light Brown Hair, performed by the Gotham Quartet. The song was written by Stephen Foster. It was about his estranged wife, Jane Denny McDowell.
Happy as the day.
It was published in 1854. That same year, Britain and France and Turkey joined forces along with the tiny mountain kingdom of Sardinia to oppose Russian expansionism. The result was the Crimean War. Although the territory in question was on the Danube River, most of the fighting took place in Crimea. The British successfully blockaded Russia in both its Baltic and Black Sea outlets. In an early show of strength, British gunboats returned fire upon the city of Odessa, then ruled by Tsar Nicholas I. According to R.R. Palmer and Joel Colton, writing in A History of the Modern World, Britain and France came together in this war for the first time in centuries because they believed their interests in the Eastern Mediterranean to be threatened by Russia. The war was important for non-military reasons as well. It was the first war in which women, led by Florence Nightingale, established their position as army nurses. It's the first war photographed and written about by newspaper correspondents. Every nuance was devoured by readers around the world, including those in the Loyalist settlements to the west of Kingston, Ontario. When they read about the British sailing into the Black Sea and shelling Odessa, well, they were proud.
Never more to find her where the bright waters flow.
Earlier in the program, you also heard the Old Coldstream Guard March performed by the Corps of Drums, 1st and 2nd Battalions of the Coldstream Guards. The band Sonce Svit, Sun World, on its Facebook page describes itself as an industrial folk metal project. They're from Kyiv, Ukraine, founded in 2009. The song is called Tumanyarum. It means a mist in the ravine. Nasha Kasha comes to you from Radio Western 94.9 FM on the campus of Western University in London, Ontario, Canada. We're heard on CHMR 93.5 FM in St. John's, Newfoundland, on CKDU 88.1 FM in Halifax, on Local 107.3 FM in St. John, New Brunswick, on CJAS Radio 93.5 FM in Saint Augustine, Quebec, on CJLO 1690 AM in Montreal, on CFRC 101.9 FM in Kingston, on CFMU 93.3 FM in Hamilton, on CKMS 102.7 FM in Kitchener-Waterloo, on CJAM 99.1 FM in Windsor and Detroit, on CKLU 96.7 FM in Sudbury, on CILU 102.7 FM in Thunder Bay, on 101.5 UMFM in Winnipeg, on CJTR 91.3 FM in Regina, on CFMQ 98.1 FM in Hudson Bay, Saskatchewan, on CFBX 92.5 FM in Kamloops, on CIVL 101.7 FM in Abbotsford, on CJSF 90.1 FM in Vancouver, and on CHLY 101.7 FM in Nanaimo, British Columbia. The Crimean War began as a power conflict. The French and the British determined to halt the age-old Russian attempt to expand into the Balkans, to gain control of the Straits of Bosphorus and the Mediterranean trade routes, a particularly important goal in view of the expanding wheat trade of the Black Sea ports. So writes York University professor Oris Subtelny in his book Ukraine, a History. The last song, Tumanyarom, was about a Cossack. Subtelny writes, when the Tsarist government announced in 1855 the formation of a volunteer militia, Ukraine's peasants believed that it meant the renewal of Cossackdom, and that was synonymous with freedom from serf obligations. Thousands rushed to form Cossack units, and they refused to serve their landlords. In Kyiv province, 180,000 peasants from more than 400 villages identified themselves as Kozaké, and they demanded an end to serfdom. Troops were sent in, order was restored, but one of the internal weaknesses that plagued Nicholas I was revealed. Subtelny wrote, despite the heroic defense of Sevastopol, the Russian troops suffered ultimate defeat. The Russian command structure proved incompetent, and Tsarist soldiers, most of whom were serfs, lacked both technical skills and initiative. Crushed by defeat, Nicholas died in 1855. His son, Alexander, would come to the throne, and he would end serfdom. Are you Jim?
Yes.
I'm Steve Andrusiak.
Hello.
I was just talking to Pam.
Yes. Hello, my name is Jim Sova. I had previously worked in municipal planning, municipalities in the area in Loyalist Township, and I am currently acting as a volunteer in the archives in Napanee. I'm transcribing some old newspapers to electronic files.
And Napanee and Odessa are part of the same county or township?
Part of the same county. So Napanee is the county town, so it's the main town in the county. Odessa, Loyalist Township is the largest, one of the largest townships in that county, and Odessa is the central part of that township. So it's where the local government is for that township.
Okay, and we're sitting in what is a refurbished jail?
Yes, this was the original, when the county separated, originally Lennox and Addington and Frontenac counties were together as one county. When Lennox and Addington separated from Frontenac County, they built their own courthouse and jail. So we're sitting in the back end of what originally was the jail. It's now been refurbished. It's the museum and archives for Lennox and Addington.
Of all the names they could have called it, they called it Odessa.
Yeah, it's one of those things. In most cases, you see a lot of reference to names of villages coming from the postmaster. Postmaster picked that name. I'm actually, with the work I've been doing now, transcribing, or what I'm doing is taking old newspapers and taking them from microfilm and making electronic files. As you do the scanning, you tend to read the newspapers. The newspapers I'm reading now are in around about 1902, and it's surprising for a weekly, a lot of the news of the world is in there, and there's a lot of discussion then about the beginnings of the Russian Revolution and a lot of things coming from there. It's surprising how much overseas news is in there, and I suspect back in the 1850s was similar. The British Whig probably had information on the war that was going on over there. So that would have been the first time people had anything to read, and so they probably would have been quite voracious in reading all that information and finding out what was going on in the world and finding all these new places of names.
And the British Whig was one of the two papers that amalgamated to become what is today the Kingston Whig Standard?
That's my understanding, yeah. So there were a number of newspapers around at the time, but certainly a lot of them, the ones I'm doing is one of the Napanee papers. There were a couple of Napanee newspapers at the time. It's only an 8-page newspaper in 1904, and probably a half page or more of that was world news. That would have been the only access they had to world news, so that's how they found out about the world. So there's articles about Africa, there's articles about China, there's articles about Japan, and the war at that point. There was a war between the Russians and the Japanese, so you'd have ongoing reports every week about what ships were sunk and what generals were involved and what places they were at. So all these unusual names would pop up, and that's probably what caught people's interest.
In the 1980s, there was a movement, or an idea at least, if it didn't grow into a movement, to change the name back to Mill Creek.
It was something that was brought up by one of the councillors at the time, to say, well, we don't really have a great name of why it's called Odessa at the time. It was changed over. Maybe there's a reason to think maybe we should bring it back to Mill Creek. It was Mill Creek before. There aren't a whole pile of places that are named after mills, so maybe it's time to think about about that. So my recollection was there was a fair bit of discussion, a lot of people going, well, no, this we've known as Odessa at that point, past anyone's history, anyone's local knowledge of the time, to say no. We think it's a local name. We think it's an interesting name, and we want to keep that name.
You think it's a keeper for going into the future?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, it's we know some of the history of how it evolved to that. So it's interesting. I mean, it's interesting to see a real selection. Like we've got a Moscow north of here. So it's interesting just to say the history of how those changed over time. Mill Creek is a interesting name, but like you say, there's lots of mills and lots of creeks around. Having some tie to the history to know why it became Odessa is an interesting way to be able to tie back to stories and what was happening at that point in time.
What sparked your interest in history and archives?
I think one of the funny stories I told when I started here first was that when I was working in planning, you'd always be working on something, and then something else would pop up, and you'd get diverted, and you work on a third thing and diverted to that. So I said, when I retired, what I was going to do was find some place that I thought would be really interesting to work with, and say, okay, I can do the job that you always wanted to do, but never had the time to get to.
Did your family come up during those revolutionary times?
One side of the family fought with the British. He was actually part of a British regiment that was brought up here and created here. So they actually got land down in Glengarry County. They were one of the people who, I think 4 times great-grandfather on my mother's side was one of the Loyalists. I think I've got 5 or 6 Loyalists back in my family tree. The other side of my family is French-Canadian, so they were in Canada actually back to 1650, I think, or something like that. Would have been the first of my ancestors who came to Canada.
Sauve?
It was Sauvé. Sauvé, the French, Jeanne Sauvé, the former Governor General, would be, well, through her husband, related. Virtually all the Sauvés relate to one soldier who came over in 1670, thereabouts. Married someone who was here, had 10 children, and I think at least 100 grandchildren, from the records I can find so far. So there's a whole pile of people descended from him. I'm one of them. There's at least 16 spellings of the name that one of the family tree researchers has tracked down different spellings for anglicizations of Sauvé, the French Sauvé.
Wow, deep roots, deep roots. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Down in Texas, the city of Odessa was named by railway workers who said the landscape reminded them of their homeland. The name has stuck. There are Odessas in the states of Delaware, Florida, Minnesota, Missouri, Nebraska, New York, Washington. There is Odessa Township and a lake named Odessa in Michigan. Also, Odessa, Saskatchewan. Today, Odessa, Ukraine has, it's changed its name. The Ukrainian official spelling has dropped one of the S's. Yes, Odessa is spelled O-D-E-S-A, not O-D-E-S-S-A. No word on whether the other Odessas will follow suit. Here's a song about Odessa. It's written and performed by an artist named Ben as part of his Ukulele Road Trips project. That project pursues a musical and cultural adventure across the world. The song is written about Odessa's Potomkin Stairs, the city's formal gateway to the Black Sea.
There are some feelings that we all share. Sometimes a flicker, sometimes light. Sometimes a rainbow surprises us there, where things were seen in black and white. We walk along a flight of stairs, down to the sea that we won't touch. We fly above them, all these worldly cares, and wide, dark steps of pure asphalt. If the city's eyes are on us here at this late hour, if Odessa stares and watches upon us tonight, we won't care.
Partial funding for Nasha Kasha is provided by the Shevchenko Foundation and by the Ukrainian Credit Union. Nasha Kasha is also a podcast. There's an easy way to access it for free. Go to nashakasha.libsyn.com. Nasha Kasha is one word. Libsyn is spelled Libsyn.com. nashakasha.libsyn.com. New Pathway Ukrainian News delivers news and insight every week in English and Ukrainian. Subscribe today at newpathway.ca.
If the city's eyes are on us here at this late hour, if Odessa stares and watches upon us tonight, we won't care. We won't care. If the city's eyes are on us here at this late hour, if Odessa stares and watches upon us tonight, we won't care. We won't care.
Добігаємо до кінця нашої передачі. My thanks to FinJam and to their record company Red House Records, and to Ben at www.ukuleleroadtrips.com. There you can find out more about the Ukulele Road Trips project.
If the city's eyes are on us here at this late hour, if Odessa stares and watches upon us tonight, we won't care.
I'm your reporter Stefan Andrusiak. Back in a week, God willing. До милої зустрічі за тиждень часу. Дорогі слухачі.